All right, hello. This is the first ever Q&A for the channel. I thought a Q&A would be a really good idea because it would be a consistent source of practice for me to be able to speak in front of the mic without any sort of script, and also be able to kind of, interact with my audience in a consistent basis. So I want to combine both of those things, trying to get better at speaking without a script and actually, communicate with the fan base. So, question number one: favorite era of Toriyama's art? For me, it's probably gonna be the Cell Saga. I really like, because by that point, Toriyama had really figured out what he was like doing with the characters. Just kind of, he had figured out what he had wanted to do with the characters. He doesn't need to think so hard about the art and like coming up with the consistency. It's all dialed in by that point, and I really like the line art. I think it's no surprise that deep in, Toriyama came up with a completely iconic character of Trunks, because by that point he just had so much experience drawing the work, and if you think about it, it's so crazy that basically like 70% of the way in, around there or so, Toriyama came up with one of his most iconic character designs of Trunks with the jacket and the high-waisted pants and the sword and the bowl cut. Like that's one of his most iconic designs, and it's like 70% of the way in. It didn't suffer, it didn't fall off near the end. So it's probably gotta be the Cell Saga, but I am also partial to when Toriyama was more was building up to the more muscular style of the second half of the story, whereas in the transitional period in the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai, it was kind of weird. It was like Toriyama didn't exactly have it all dialed in yet, but by the time the Saiyan Saga had rolled around, it was really, he had more come into that style, and it fit better. Whereas like it felt like Toriyama was configuring his previous style to fit into a more muscular style, and I personally just don't really like the look of it. He drew abs kind of weird in the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai, but during the Saiyan Saga, that's when the transition to started becoming more natural for the art style. So if I had to pick, and for me, looking at the color manga, I really, really like how the color manga looks for the Cell Saga. Just everybody looks really good. Super Saiyan looks good. I like all the designs in the Cell Saga. I'm particular to these more the big spreads in the Cell Saga, like when Android 19 and Dr. Gero show up. Those two panels, those are really cool. I like the big panel at the end of the Cell Saga. So for me, it's got to be the Cell Saga. I really like how that looks in the manga format, especially the color manga. And then I did want to add on to that. So I wrote a script, but I just kind of deliberately deleted it. I was like, okay, well, it's just kind of not necessary. So I kind of developed my thoughts and then swiped them away, so that I have some sort of starting point, but I have to come up with the verbiage on my own. So during that, I came up with like another answer for this. So that's what I personally prefer from Toriyama. But if you were to ask me like who depicted Dragon Ball, so in the animated format, that I like the most, my favorite era would be Dead Zone and World's Strongest. I really like how the characters look in Dead Zone and World's Strongest. It feels really good to look at. It's got the combination of the like earlier style of Dragon Ball and the later style. It's just got the perfect fusion where the characters still move like they're martial artists, but with some stronger and more defined lines and more musculature. Like just the way they look in Dead Zone and World's Strongest is just completely awesome, and is my personal favorite style ever. I personally like how the characters look the most in those two films. I actually like them more than how Toriyama drew them, even, with the possible exception of Piccolo, because there's just almost no artist that draws Piccolo correctly. Like, even when they draw him pretty good, it never feels like how when you look at how Toriyama draws him, like he almost never looks correct. But that's why I think especially Dead Zone is really impressive, because Dead Zone, the artists were so locked in on drawing Piccolo in Dead Zone, and one of my favorite pieces of art in all of Dragon Ball is when Goku and Piccolo are staring down Garlic, and Piccolo's kind of got this like orc tooth, this kind of like orc fang drawn, and it works for Piccolo, bro. It just really works. I really like that little orc fang. So yeah, that's my answer for favorite era of Toriyama's art. Second question. My favorite Dragon Ball character. It's just gotta be Piccolo. There's no other character it could be. It's Piccolo every day. Every single time, it's Piccolo. If you could bring any DBZ movie villain into the Dragon Ball narrative, who would it be and why? For me, before I answer that, I want to go back. So, I made sure to ask a clarifying question when this was asked in the posts, and that was like, can it be multiple or does it have to be just the one? And they said that it could be, as long as it's like from the same movie. So it's Bojack. The reason it's Bojack is because in Dragon Ball, it's a group. It's a group of characters. It's a huge cast. Goku, Gohan, Goten, Trunks, Vegeta, Bulma, Piccolo, Tien, Yamcha, Krillin. There are so many characters, and so many of them are fighters. One of their main narrative functions is to do the combat, so it's important that these characters actually get to do something. Why are so many characters in here with the same function and I cannot perform that function? I don't want to bring movie villains into the story if it's just the one, because it just becomes a little bit harder to bring these other characters up. But if you're doing like this huge cast like Dragon Ball has, then it just only makes sense for me to bring in the villains with an entourage. So it's Bojack. And the reason I think Bojack is just such a perfect character if you were to bring it into Dragon Ball somewhere, Bojack has the perfect answer, because he has the transformation. He has this very, like, Bojack and his crew, they have this, like, it's a mirror to the Dragon Ball cast almost. All of the Saiyans, they're matched by Bojack and his crew. They turn green, and then their hair like becomes like a sharper, more colorful orange. Like, it's just a natural fit to go against the Dragon Ball cast, and it just really works. And so the group dynamic could be really cool of the Z Fighters versus his crew, and I really like that idea. So it's got to be Bojack for me if I were gonna bring a Dragon Ball movie villain into the like core storyline. And then another thing that I think could be interesting is if in Dragon Ball, almost all of the villains, if they have some sort of crew or there is some sort of hierarchy established, they almost always they're willing to sacrifice their pieces. It's always like a chess match. Like, I'm gonna sacrifice my pieces. It doesn't matter to me that, my underlings, they are my underlings. I'm just gonna throw them to the wind if it helps me win. Like, almost all of the villains are like that. I really can't even point to a villain that's not like that. Bojack is like that too, when he throws Zangya in front of Gohan, and then it doesn't really matter because they both get slimed. I think it could be really interesting if Bojack was written to be more like affable, more likable, and more like a proper leader. I think that could be interesting if he was. Yeah, I guess that's how I would do. It's like if I were to put someone in the core Dragon Ball storyline, I would definitively make Bojack. He's not a good person, but he's like good to his crew, because you don't really see that in Dragon Ball. I think that could be really interesting. And that I think it could be you could make an iconic character pretty immediately by separating him with that like differential, and then at the very end, Bojack's like, well, a captain goes down with his ship. I think that could be cool. Okay, so someone asked this question in the posts, and then they just kind of deleted it. But this is kind of the gist of whatever their question was, which is, what do you think? What do you think makes the characters in Dragon Ball memorable? So there are a lot of answers for this. This is very subjective, though. But the reason that I think they're very memorable is, one, Toriyama is always good at making like fun, different, cute, and cool character designs. Many of the characters are wearing very distinct outfits or distinct colors, different from each other, or in the case of like the Saiyan battle armor or the Turtle Hermit gi, there is effort put in by Toriyama to actually make the characters like similar. They wear uniforms. So that's like a great aspect of making them very memorable from designs, but it's also one of the great ways that Toriyama makes these characters so memorable is that they're almost always going against Goku. Basically, every single character, almost, not every single one, but almost every single character that is introduced into the story has an adversarial relationship with Goku at first, or Goku has to earn them, or they are like bickering. One of the, like, because I would say that like one of the only characters that this isn't really true for is Bulma, but even then that's not really true because they get off on the wrong foot and Bulma shoots him. You know, she kind of gives up immediately when Goku gets up and isn't slimed out by the bullet, but it's like still almost every single relationship is adversarial at first, which kind of like that's like fundamentals of storytelling stuff where it's like antagonism, problem solving, problem solved, antagonist defeated or moved on from. And so I think that makes almost all of the Dragon Ball characters memorable. Bulma's an antagonist for an extremely short period of time, but they get off on the wrong foot. They aren't immediately friends. They get off on the wrong foot. So Bulma, Oolong is a villain. Puar and Yamcha are villains. Krillin is antagonistic and it forms a rivalry, not friendly relationship with Goku at first. Basically every single character, almost every single character without question, is an antagonist. So I think that like fundamentals of storytelling stuff is some of the reasons why it's like really memorable, because they are slotted in the antagonist position, and so therefore a story has to be told for them to even join the group. And so that's why almost all of them are super memorable, and it's like a combination of great and fun character design and like the fundamentals of storytelling. Will you make an MGS video? Unfortunately, it's going to be a pretty definitive no, because I do not have a whole lot of experience with Metal Gear. I like number 2 and number 3. I played those games, but those are the only games I have played, and I have not played very much of this series. I just kind of have played those 2, and really even then, I've played MGS3 like once a couple of years ago. It's like, it's cool. I like the game. Cool story, interesting characters, but I'm just not tapped in like that. And it's important to me that I don't half-ass the videos, like insofar as like if I have something to say, I'm actually going to like replay the game or reread the story so that I can accurately give the information. I try my best to shy away from just kind of like bullshitting a video, because if I do that, it's just not going to read as sharp. It's not going to be as good. So it's like, I don't see myself getting super invested in Metal Gear and don't really have a specific video topic that I want to make about it. So the answer is probably just going to be no for if I make a MGS video. But I do have some good news in that category, where it's like, I think game design is really interesting, and I have a lot to say insofar as like game design principles. And there are some really interesting things that Metal Gear Solid 2 does near the climax of the story that I will talk about in a video. I'm not talking about MGS directly. I'm probably never going to make a video specifically about Metal Gear or a title, but I know for sure that Snake and Raiden versus the Goons right before the very end of the story, or the very end of the game rather, that specific gameplay section is going to show up in a video at some point, because I think it's emblematic of how you can use gameplay to tell story. And that, like, that's the stuff that I really like in games. I'm pretty at this point I'm pretty anti cutscene. Not even that, like, I'm like, you know, median line. No, it's like, no, I'm kind of against cutscene now when I play games, where it's like, if it's gonna be a cutscene, it's gotta be good. Why are we stopping the game? And I think that and it's like moments like that in games where I do not need a cutscene, and it so accurately portrays the skill of Solid Snake, because I see it in play. I'm like, he's like going crazier on these guys than I could ever possibly go crazy on these guys. Like, it's infinitesimally more like effectively communicated because it's through the gameplay rather than a cutscene. Favorite moment in any manga. This one is hard, but even then I came up with 2 answers for this pretty fast. But, like, again, this is subject to change, and I may be forgetting something that I think was really impactful. But these 2 are the ones that were really kind of like bubbled up to the surface first, which makes me think that, yeah, these are probably for sure my favorite moments. So I have 2 answers. One is Ryuhei Sawamura versus Ryo Mashiba from Hajime no Ippo. And the reason that I really like that is because it's like my favorite moment that I never got to see from Dragon Ball, which is Piccolo versus Vegeta. I feel like there was like a light rivalry between the 2. It never really expanded further, but it was like the reason Piccolo was such a good character is because he's like the only character that like never takes any shit from Vegeta and never just kind of like lets it sit there. Like Tien, of course, being the other example, but like in the story, it feels like everyone's giving Vegeta a pass, and that's why I don't like. Vegeta's well written by himself, but the story of Vegeta is not nearly as well written as Vegeta fans think it is. And it's for those reasons why I really like Piccolo, because Piccolo feels like it's one of the few cast members that's not letting it slide like that, where he's putting Vegeta under the microscope in the work, and that's why Sawamura versus Mashiba is like the sickest shit ever, because it's basically within the context of Hajime no Ippo. If you were to compare it to Dragon Ball, if you haven't read Hajime no Ippo as a fan of the channel, it's basically Piccolo versus Vegeta, and Piccolo wins. Like, that shit is so nasty. I really wish that happened, but you know, it's so good in Hajime no Ippo because the way Hajime no Ippo constructs its narrative, like, it allows for these deeper like setting combats. It doesn't have to be like traditional protagonist antagonist only focus on Ippo's journey. Like, it's that combat is 2 secondary characters fighting each other. Like, these are not super important characters for the narrative, but they're important for the audience. Like, the audience likes these guys, and so it's really cool to see this kind of heel versus heel matchup where you still have a face because Mashiba has his sister, and Ippo inspired Mashiba to like take boxing more seriously and to trying to be better rather than just kind of rely on his like natural gifts and almost kind of like a cheater and kind of giving in to this persona where it's like Ryo Mashiba isn't like the super attractive guy. He's not like ugly or anything, but it's like he looks very sharp, looks very unfriendly, so people kind of like they push these labels onto Mashiba, and Mashiba is such an interesting character because it's almost like, well, if people think like I'm a bad guy, then what's the point? You know what I mean? He kind of like is following the path of least resistance that way. But Ippo, like going against Ippo makes him want to be better at boxing. Like, I don't care about these labels, whatever, man. I'm just gonna box, be better for myself and be better for my sister so that we can like have a good living. And so Mashiba is like a really noble character in that way. Mashiba is really, really cool. And then Sawamura, by that point, like we've never seen a character with like as true like outright villainy. It's always like they have some swagger, or they're kind of like Sendo, or they're like kind of shitty, but it's not a big deal. You can't really be a villain, you know. That's what's so interesting about Hajime no Ippo is there are very few villains. It's just kind of like guys that kind of like cheat a little bit. So we're like, man, you're not a good boxer, but it's like it's never truly villainous. Sawamura is like one of the few characters that you can even point to the universe as being a bad guy, like actual villain. We're entering villain territory, and so it's really cool to see that matchup of Sawamura versus Mashiba. It's like when I read that for the first time, I started taking laps because I'm like, oh, yo, are they actually setting this up? And it's like, it's such a cool combat, and I really enjoy it because that's the fundamentals of storytelling stuff. Because on the face, it's heel versus heel matchup, but there's enough there for the audience to like get behind Mashiba and be like, man, Sawamura sucks. But because of how skilled Sawamura is, it's like, Mashiba might not win because we know how good Sawamura is and how he like almost beat Ippo. And so that's just one of the most amazing fights in any story. In any story I've seen, and especially in manga, that was one of my favorite moments. Is like, it has to be one of my favorite moments in any manga, because when they're setting up for the fight, I kind of like got out of my chair. I'm like, yo, are they actually setting up this combat? Like, this is exactly what I wanted to see. And so that's one of my favorite moments in any manga, Sawamura versus Mashiba. And then, so not in a combat context, in more of like a storytelling context, one of my favorite moments in any manga is Junji Ito's The Intersections Pretty Boy. And if you don't know what that is, Junji Ito is a horror mangaka. It's all short stories, like very few established narratives from Junji Ito. But in The Intersections Pretty Boy, it's like one of the few longer stories, like more than 100 pages. And in The Intersections Pretty Boy, it's basically about this kind of like dark ghost figure who was like haunting this intersection, this crosswalk or crossing. And like early in the morning, all these girls are like going to this crosswalk to like have their fortune be told. It's like this kind of like folklore legend thing. They're trying to do it for good luck, assumedly. But the Intersection Pretty Boy is this like demonic entity that does not answer your fortune, or he like gives you bad fortunes, or he says that like life's not worth living, or these like all these negative things. And it ends up being that like all of these people like kill themselves, and so this like dark cloud is like really hovers over the town. And it's such an interesting story because it's just so true. If you've ever worked in any sort of like creative thing or been in anything where it's like you're in the public eye, like I know that I'm a small YouTube channel, but literally I've already come up with like more than 10 YouTube comments which are just extremely negative and they don't have anything to say. Like, I'm not saying you even have to agree with what I say or what I talk about on my channel. I don't care, but it's like they say things like you're stupid, or like you're so unintelligent, or it's like this looks like a fifth grader made it, or like they just kind of like, oh, okay, but have you ever made anything? No. Heard that. Like, it's, people always have negative things to say, and I really like how Junji Ito explores like literally the concept of that negative energy. Literally, someone is just, he exists to hate. That's who the Intersections Pretty Boy is. He's this ghostly figure who hates, and his hate is so damaging that they like take it upon themselves to ruin their lives, basically. Like, it's such an interesting concept, and like I think it was it's my personal favorite story from Junji Ito, and I really like how it's explored because in the climax of that story, the main character, who's basically being hassled by this demonic entity throughout the entire story, he starts saying good things. He starts telling good fortunes. So instead of the Intersections Pretty Boy, he like coming and hating and then they kill themselves, he stands in those crosswalks and answers those fortunes and tells good fortunes instead. And then at the very end of the story, the Intersections Pretty Boy locks eyes with the main character, and the main character is ascended to some sort of like deity, like soft, like good version of him. And it's like such a sick concept, bro, because it's like instead of hating, he's like bringing others up, and in so doing is as powerful as the Intersections Pretty Boy, and like ascends to this like soft godhood. This doesn't happen in other Junji Ito works. It's almost always like they barely got away, or there's like a humanistic element, or they didn't get away, and it's like that's the horror aspect. And so, but that's why I love that ending to the story of the Intersections Pretty Boy so much, because it's like not only is it uncommon for Junji Ito's work as a whole, it's like not a horror. It's a horror the whole way, and then it just turns up into this uplifting message where it's like if you believe in it, you can cause the change that you want to see. And it's like you see this concept all the time in fiction, like the inspiring hero character, but it was so interesting to see that in Junji Ito, because it's pretty clear that he's doing protagonists in these horror stories, but in that one it's a hero, and it's clearly and unambiguously a hero, and it feels really good because the main character's been hassled this whole time. People think he's the Intersections Pretty Boy that's like telling all these bad fortunes and telling people to kill themselves, but then at the end he comes and he does like the truest face turn and combats him directly in this like mystical way, and it's just so sick. If you have any interest after hearing me say that, like I would really recommend that you read The Intersections Pretty Boy by Junji Ito. It's my personal favorite story, in that moment where like he transcends, like that's my Super Saiyan. I think that shit is way more sick than Super Saiyan is. Who would you put into Tekken? This question was asked by a friend of the channel, and who I would put into Tekken would be Kiryu Kazuma from Yakuza, or Ryuga Gotoku, and it's just because he is such a natural fit. He really should have been in there in Tekken 7. I don't know how he didn't get in there when Yakuza was more popular, but Negan from The Walking Dead did. It's just kind of like, that really should have been an indication of what Tekken 8's direction was going to be, when Negan from The Walking Dead is getting in and not Kiryu, but whatever. And then the other one would be Brad Hawk from Urban Reigns. So that character is such a sick character, because I've been playing Urban Reign again, and like, man, that game is just so amazing. It's one of the best games ever made. That was also made by the people who made Tekken, because Law and Paul are both in Urban Reign as like secret unlockable characters. So like Brad Hawk, perfect sense. Like you already have the rights to this character. You don't even have to fight for it. It's just like, oh, people who already like it would love that. You don't even have to like buy the rights for that. You own the rights for that. So I don't even understand why you can't put him in for a guest character. He's such a cool character. The only problem with Brad Hawk is that a lot of Brad's attacks are taken from like his animations are taken from Tekken characters. So it's like, well, yeah, I guess, like some of these animations aren't new. So it's like, hey, you're recycling. It's like, no. So that part would kind of suck. But I like Brad Hawk's way more interesting than almost all of these like guest characters, with the exception of like Geese, Akuma, and Yujiro Hanma. They just announced, like, those are some pretty cool characters. I think those totally fit for Tekken. But Brad Hawk for sure from Urban Reign. And then this one is just like me personally, but it's like the way Tekken 8 is now, he's literally not even out of place. They fucking put Victor in there, so Zero from Borderlands 2 is literally not out of place. But that's just bias. Me personally, I'd love to see Zero in any like legit fighting game that was like good and had cool systems. I just would love to play Zero and more things that weren't just Borderlands 2. And then, would you release your like fictitious works elsewhere? Also asked by the same person who asked who would I put into Tekken. And so yes, I'm absolutely planning to release my work and soon. And then I'm also using this platform. I kind of was like, I see this happen, and so why not? Let me throw my hat into the ring. And so it's like I'm basically using YouTube to build hype for my books. I want my books to do better than my YouTube videos, but Dragon Ball already exists. These other properties already exist, so I have to earn the right for my stuff to be sick or known as good or quality or be interesting. So, yeah. And then, so the two works that I'm working on right now, the first one is All Diamonds. It's about guild mages, both their kind of like daily lives and like their storylines and what they have to go through, and going on quests and stuff. And the the main idea behind All Diamonds is that every single member of the guild is a protagonist in their own right, and then it's like I don't. It's like kind of like an anthology almost, where it's like every book you get to see a different character's perspective, with some characters being more important than others, but overall you get to see this huge like cast of characters go on their own journeys. And then the other one that I'm working on right now, that I'm writing in between YouTube scripts and writing between editing, is Hierarchy. And Hierarchy is basically about like all of the nobles have hoarded the magics for themselves. Even though they could spread it out to like the commoners, they're basically saying like, oh, this isn't magic, this isn't, these are nobilities, i.e. like noble ability. These are nobilities. These aren't magics. We can't even teach you this because, it's the birthright. And so they're hoarding all the magics intentionally. And then the main character is going against the nobles and be like, is basically going to tear down the system. And so it's like one focused protagonist. And it's like, we watch this character rise from nothing into like taking down the system of the noble hierarchy. And those are my two works that I'm planning on releasing when I can get the right publishers. I'm thinking of potentially releasing through Amazon. I don't know though. But yeah, those are the two works that I'm working on right now: All Diamonds and Hierarchy. Okay. So as of right now, those are all the questions. So cool. Later.